Hindi kayo nag-assessment? Again?
Nagbigay kayo ng assessment?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. I have to pay the internet because I think tomorrow or the next day
Change
will be
begins the
the
moment
selection
you
day.
get the courage and step outside
Yeah.
your comfort
Yeah.
zone. Change begins at the end of your comfort zone. Fear of the unknown isn't just simply being scared
Glad
of
you
what you don't
mentioned it.
know. This can also apply when we cling the comforts of our hobbies and hesitate to venture outside of our circles. What point is there to try something new, something unknown, when we've gotten used to something comfortable? The true nature of the human experience is an always changing, ever evolving, growing process. This can also apply to the games we play. Venturing to a new hobby, a new system, there are things that
When
keep
it's
us
uh,
and hold us
what
back.
is status code
A
500?
refusal to engage in new
Server.
experiences. In this second episode
Ah,
of The Fear of the Unknown, we'll be discussing about the joy and comforts of our hobby and the anxieties that come with trying something new in the realm of tabletop RPGs. This talk is meant to encourage, not condemn, to invite, not inflict. A heads up that the third and final installment of this trilogy talk, The Horror in Running Games with Jay, the Philippine Gamer, and Lance, Greasy Snitches, will be on October 25, 3 to 5 p.m. But for now, tackling the second episode of The Fear of the Unknown, we are stepping out of our comfort zones and TTRPGs with John and Paolo, two brave explorers who have ventured into many systems and games. Join in on the conversation. Comment down the comment section below for questions and reactions to the topic. Hey guys, you may reveal yourselves.
Hey,
Hello.
hello.
Awesome.
Awesome. Right, so we have Paolo and John who will be starting. There's a voice cutting to the start. Oops. Yeah, sorry about that. So, for now, we will do the introductions of our two speakers for our second episode. Who are you? And let's start first with John.
right?
Good.
Yeah, good.
Okay, great. Just thought I cut out for a moment. So Mars introduced me. I've been in previous episodes. Uh, I've dabbled in a bunch of different RPG systems, played different games. So I'm kind of a very I would say generalist kind of guy. And yeah, my favorite systems out there are quite widespread. There's quite a bit of it, which we'll get into later on in the podcast, I suppose. I think that's it for now. Yeah, that's good.
Hi, I'm Paolo or PJC. You can call me either. Either. I also self-publish my games as Shibboleth, although less people know that name than I'd like. Um, in terms of the systems I've played, or put it this way, as both a player and as a GM, my preferences are for systems that are narrative oriented, where any crunch and mechanics are at the service of the story, and so that it's really shared storytelling with rules rather than having to consult a rule book um, in order to move things forward. And I guess I can discuss that organically while we talk about our experiences with different systems and getting out of the comfort zone.
Um, so just a bit of an icebreaker so that people can get to know you guys more. What are the three fictional characters that you guys feel you can relate to or feel like, hey, this is me?
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna take a second there and think about it because what about? So PJC, right? So maybe you want to go ahead.
Sure. Off the top of my head, this isn't the most flattering answer, but I definitely have always like connected with Rob, the protagonist from High Fidelity. Because although the way he sees, although my tastes are broader and not just music oriented, it's I am a huge music nerd, but I'm also equally like into different tabletop gaming systems, different film genres. But I sort of do process things in a weirdly consume things in a weirdly personalized way, the way that Rob from High Fidelity does. Oh, and I see DM Corgi. I think this is DM Corgi saying hi in the chat. You want to go with your first choice, John?
Right. Fictional character popped into my mind. This is a super stereotypical trope, but I'll go with the character from Lord of the Rings, and I guess it would be Aragorn. It's a super stereotypical character because I kind of connect with the whole took a while for him to find himself kind of thing. So I feel like that's what happened with me in life. So yeah, it took a while for me to figure out like, oh, what is it I really think I'm supposed to do and that kind of thing. I don't know if that's an RPG answer, but that is something that I guess you could say a lot of people deal with, and it's a hero's journey, and something I would also like. I like seeing in games, both as a player and as a GM with my players. So yeah, that's my first character.
The second character I identify with is Newt Geisler from Pacific Rim, where like I relate to his enthusiasm, and I also sort of like the way he translates his questionable kaiju fandom into practical world saving uh crazy ideas. That's something I guess I could say I aspire to. And I sort of feel like his energy matches mine. Your second character?
Second character comes to mind is from the series of Jim Butcher. Si Harry. So Harry Dresden. Um, so Harry is a wizard, and he very self-awarely refers to him in that. So it's a very tongue-in-cheek kind of series, and I really like it because of the world building, but also because Harry himself is a very likable and very interesting character. He grows a lot from when he's like uh, hot-headed, brash, young wizard detective until he gets older, and he still kind of has that at his core, that stubborn streak. But it kind of interests me how he matures over the course of the series. So that's another favorite for me, and yeah, it's also another really interesting setting because they also made an RPG out of it, which uses the fate system. It's also very self-aware that we are a fictional character making an RPG about ourselves. It's really really funny. So anyhow, so yun, second character. Back to you.
Okay. I'm trying to think.
I don't. Do we need to finish? I don't think we need to finish the three, but
Nope,
Yeah.
not at all. But so speaking of like identifying with fictional characters,
Yeah.
uh, you're known at least you guys have a certain persona in the TTRPG community. What are you guys known for in the general TTRPG community? When people come across John or Paolo, it's like, oh, this is this guy or this is this person. So, what are you best known for in the TTRPG community?
I would defer to Paolo first because, like, actually, this is the first time. No, that's honestly, this is the first time I've actually gotten down to chat with him. But I have seen him around in the community. I know he's got, like, as he mentioned, he's self-published and he's got all these things. As a GM and as a player, I feel like he's a lot more credible. I feel like I represent more of the. I wouldn't say non-novice player. Like I've played a lot of different things. I've tried some GMing. Gotten a couple of short campaigns under my belt, but I don't think I'm at that point. Like I've published anything, so I'd like to defer to him on this first, as what his rep is. What do you think?
It's weird because I don't even give a whole lot of thought to like my rep. Um, like, and I also feel that like different, depending on where people are approaching it, different people know me for different things. I feel like a lot of people think of me as Call of Cthulhu Keeper, and all of its related, D100 settings like Delta Green, but and then I think another set of people know me because of the the Honey Heist hack I made called Titas of Arkham, which applies like a combination of like Tita culture with like Lovecraftian elements, and that was something that people seem to really buy into when I launched it at Session Zero Con in 2019. God, I miss in-person cons. um, I'm not entirely sure what people know me for, if I'm even known for anything. Just because, like, I mean, for better or for worse, I try not to limit myself in terms of the systems I play. But as a result, it also makes it harder for me to have a definite like brand or something that I can, or selling point. Just because, I mean, if anything, that flexibility and adaptability in terms of systems is my selling point.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. Now, like when you're really widespread over different things.
Mhm.
For me, I would say this just because a couple of other friends of ours and Mars have mentioned it to me before. They see me as like, oh, John is like into the storyteller slash Genesis system. So that would be the stuff of Fantasy Flight games and the used to be the White Wolf stuff, but it's now Onyx Path. So that's Exalted, Scion, and L5R Star Wars RPG. So that cluster of games seems to be what I am known for. Uh, because they've mentioned it to me, like, oh hey, you should talk to John about this. I'm like, what? Oh, okay, sure. So because of that, that's like, all right. I guess I'm associated with those games more than the rest of the uh, stuff out there.
Awesome, awesome. So speaking of systems, the systems you've explored, you guys have Delta Green, Call of Cthulhu, Legend of Five Rings. What other systems have you guys explored?
Hmm. I don't know. Elephant in the room, I guess. Throwing it out there, we have probably played 5e and the D&D family somewhere. Uh, I don't know. Is that does it hold true for you?
Yes, I mean, I started actively gaming when it was still D&D 4e, but I think by the time 5e rolled around, I was already proactively seeking out alternative systems, to the point that I was almost a late adopter to 5e, just because when at the point that it was picking up and that Adventurers Guild was being established, I said to myself, all right, I'm really going to be playing more in other systems. The ones that I've explored most heavily are all the ones that are based off of Apocalypse World and the powered by the Apocalypse system. Run
Yeah, sorry
Monster
about that.
Hearts, um, Monster of the Week, Masks. And I'd really love to get back to a regular Masks game, just because the whole teenage superhero setting is like perennial, and I can always come back to it, just because it's sort of where my sympathies are as a reader as well.
Other systems. I have heard of the powered by the what do you call it? Powered by
Powered
the
by the
Apocalypse.
Apocalypse. Yeah.
Right. It's been floating around and it's something like, oh, that sounds interesting. But I never had a group which ran it that I could play with yet. So I'll see about that. Cthulhu is something I've played with Lance, and that was really fun. A couple of games with her. I suppose the other thing that comes to mind is Shadowrun. I have dabbled in it. it has one of the best settings out there, but it also has one of the most, for me, trickiest things to run because you're simulating so many mechanics on multiple levels. So it's something I hope they could simplify with the rule set, because it's a really cool setting. Cyberpunk and everything. Cyberpunk magic is really awesome. Other systems, I wouldn't say I really have dabbled in the other stuff because I've read a lot of other material, but I haven't actually been able to get to running and playing it. So they're mostly like really pretty storybooks on my shelf, unfortunately. I hope to get to run other stuff like Coriolis and the like. So I think that's it for me.
Uh, Thank you for that. So, with all these systems, what were your first? I think you guys mentioned, at least I feel like PGC mentioned his system. But just to clarify, what was the first TTRPG that you guys got into? It's the gateway that introduced you into this hobby.
Um, I've always been taking first, so I'll pass it first for now. So
Yeah, the gateway. No, I'm not gonna even hide it. I started out with D&D like lots of other players did. Specifically, it was in fourth ed, and particularly it was the Eberron setting. In fact, if it hadn't been in Eberron, I might not have caught on at that particular point. But I was so sold on the world building, on like for those who haven't played in Eberron yet, it's basically a setting that's sort of a fantasy take on Europe between World War One and World War Two, um, and so a lot of the balance of power between nations is loosely modeled after that. And then you have noble houses that function like de facto corporations that are like presiding over what is essentially an industrialized magic world. Um,
Eberron's cool,
and
very cool.
yeah, and I thought that meshed well with how it had been ported to 4E, even with 4E's video gamey qualities and mechanics. But yeah, I think by the time that it was already moving into 5E, at that time still being branded as D&D Next, I was sort of like, okay, I had my fill with this, but I sort of, how else can I tell the same type of stories with rules that don't have to be so combat oriented, or can be more interesting in terms of the social game, in terms of deductive. So that one thing led to another. The first powered by the apocalypse system I found was Dungeon World, which by default was meant to be sort of like the catch, the point for catching people that have been or who've wanted something that's like Dungeons and Dragons but isn't as constrained mechanically. And then that just opened the floodgates from there. From Dungeon World, there was Apocalypse World. Apocalypse World led to Monster Hearts and Monster of the Week, and I sort of just never looked back. Being a late bloomer as far as fifth ed goes, like I ended up coming back to D&D like after Adventurers League was already well in place.
Well, for me, I guess I'm one of those weird guys because I didn't start with D&D, although I was exposed to it briefly. But the very first RPG I was exposed to was Exalted First Edition. And so that was a pretty heavy game in terms of narrative and mechanics. So I think maybe that set the tone for me because it was like, oh yeah, you can play like an anime style, larger than life character there. So that really appealed to me. I did play D&D briefly after, just like a couple of one-shot sessions. That was 3.5, however, so quite different. Although I also did get to play 4E and the rest. So yeah, I guess I can say that the first gateway games I had, and the stuff that I really sunk my teeth into, was really Exalted First Ed and the Second Ed later when it came out.
I'm just curious. for someone who started with Exalted, who introduced you to it?
Oh, okay. So I have no idea if he's ever gonna hear this, but my GM was a guy named Manny Nepu Moseno. So Manny, if you're out there, well, I know you're out there, but he was my first GM, and I distinctly remember him throwing us into the ocean with a loose caricature of Sebastian the crab talking to us. So I really remember that one, and yeah, so he was my first GM there. Afterwards, another friend of mine became my GM for like 3 years. This was Mark, so Mark Reyes, and I played under him as a Solar and Dragon Blooded. Although my favorite was the DBs because of they have such more interesting Game of Thronesy crazy stuff. So that was really fun for me. So yeah, that was also like the hint. Like I really like my games being well rounded, not just in terms of combat, which was cool, but also with the whole, not exactly politicking, but more of like building stuff, like nation building, society building, and just crafting cool things in game. So that's where it got spun into Exalted because Exalted's got a lot of that.
I mean, funny you should bring up nation building because that was sort of, where that one of my longest running 4E campaigns I'd been in sort of ended up going in that direction. It was an Eberron campaign, and we sort of like ended up like it was going in the direction where we were backing the non-humanoid nation of Droam to sort of rise up and become like a proto version from World of Warcraft, where they were asserting their they were going from just asserting their sovereignty to like it was borderline expansionist, but under the guise of reaching parity and solidarity between non-human peoples. And I was a shifter, so I my character definitely had a stake in that.
Yeah, that's really cool because as you mentioned, it's a game that really was set with like world power kind of background.
Yeah.
So it does seem to make sense, and I do know that 5e released. Was it 5e? D&D released a different book later on how the world building mechanics could work out. But it's just interesting they actually made time for that because it means that people actually did want to go that direction. But that's something that was kind of tacked on afterwards, I think. But yeah. So where are we going? Yeah.
So with the lovely introductions and getting to know our speakers for this second episode, we're gonna get into the meat of the conversation, discussing a few talking points on setting first the comfort zones for the hobby. So, first talking point for discussion is how do people discover TTRPGs? Like for both of you.
Friends, I would say. Yeah, definitely friends. So TTRPGs or tabletop RPGs are probably the most social analog game that can exist, because especially when you do a campaign, you set up with some friends or people who hopefully are going to be your friends for a long time, because it takes a lot of social commitment even in online versions nowadays. You still got to take time from your day and regularly set it for it. So I would say, yeah, friends, definitely.
Yeah. All right, there are two levels to this. One is that you're joining people that were already into it. Like you'll hear about a friend that's already regularly playing, and if you trust your sensibilities, then people end up getting invited along. And I definitely think that was how it was when I first started actively gaming around 2008 or so. But I think now increasingly there are also more options where if someone hears about it completely independently of their friend set, like let's say that or their online friends are fans of something like Critical Role, then they'll end up like looking for organized groups, and and that's how they end up falling into the hobby. And so
That's true.
there are more avenues now than there were ever before. And DM Courtney's asking, have we had any oh wow, you play this TRPGs too? Small world moments. I personally haven't. At least mainly because I've been at this so long that it doesn't and I've seen the changes shift that I don't consider it unlikely if someone in particular is a D&D fan, and that's usually what happens. I'll find out that they play D&D as well first. The chances of finding out that someone happens to play another RPG that I'm into, even something that's larger at the level of like World of Darkness or L5R, that still doesn't happen as much. So it would be great if that could happen organically, but it hasn't for me. What about for you, John?
Actually, that is sort of how it happened. That's how me and Mars became friends.
Oh,
In
wow.
fact, because we did see. Okay, we had a friend, and God bless his soul, who was playing 5e. GM Jazz, and I just basically went like, you know what? I want to look into this thing. I saw him at a cafe. He was running the game with his group. After he was done, I said, "Hey, you play these games? Are you?" And then we started chatting, and then we found out that he was also interested in other games because I was actually studying Star Wars, the RPG at the time, the Fantasy Flight stuff, and that's where we jumped off, and that's where I met Mars. And later on, it's like, oh, you also run L5R. That's great. It sounded so interesting. I've always wanted to play that, and it just kind of exploded from there. And then World of Darkness, like, oh, you do World of Darkness too? Like, yeah, we did this. So it actually did happen to me right here, which is weird because it's like it's funny because in a community like where we're from, which is Davao, we are not exactly the biggest community in the Philippines in our country. So it was a very small world. I would say it was very providential. So a bit of divine intervention there. Like, bam.
Was it sort of a chance meeting, or?
I was a total chance meeting. Like, I just happened to go to this cafe. So I set up my stuff. I was just like reading my books and everything. And I just saw them at a separate table. And it's like, oh, hey, that's D&D. So I'm like, oh, there's a D&D bunch of people playing in Davao. I didn't know that. And I just like, I don't know. Kapal ng mukha na lang na moment, and I just waited for them to finish, and it's like, hey, you guys play this, and like, yeah, and then stop from there. So that was out of my comfort zone moment because I just like, you know what, I want to get to know people who run games. So I just stepped out there, just talk to the GM and friends, new friends. So here we are, right? It was a really good experience.
I guess to further the question on how people discover TTRPGs, do you think, given the pandemic, we've been in this situation, the online scene for more than a year now, has online communities, online events actually helped people discover this hobby?
Yeah, I would say, I think that's a yes, definitely. I've never seen so many game streams ever on tabletop RPGs, right? I mean, Gen Con went online,
Yeah.
and that's something. So I was like, oh, cool. It became much more spectator friendly as well, because like in a real setting, it's hard to spectate an RPG. Like you have to keep looking physically over people's shoulders, and right, and that kind of gets in the way of the play. But here it's just like you just pop on stream and watch, and then you can comment, and it's a lot easier. It's a lot logistically friendlier for spectators to participate as the popcorn gallery in a game. Of course, it has its downsides too, which
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a double-sided sword because
it's a
for the
double-edged
players,
sword. Definitely for the players, it's a different experience too, though. So
Yeah.
maybe you got some stuff to say on that.
yeah, there's an element of well, there are two sides to it. One is because there's more spectators now. There's more of a consciousness around performing the role, and it could lead to like performance anxiety. I mean, it's already sometimes it can be anxiety inducing enough to have a camera pointed in your face, but that's just necessary because of how we're running games now. But then to know there are other people watching and commenting as well, it turns into more of a performance than it would be. It takes away part of the intimacy factor that would be in a face to face game. Um, at the same time, um, like there's also the fact that a lot of people that are streaming games now are influenced by bigger things like Critical Role and where you have actual professional voice actors that are running the game. So that that's can set intimidating and unrealistic standards, even as it sort of drives up the quality of the drama and the expectations for more interesting player interactions. So it's an
That is
interesting
true.
challenge.
That is true. I think yeah, especially that's more of an issue when the players and the GMs and everyone are actually aware that hey, we're streaming to a general public. Although I feel like a certain extent that can be mitigated by just having a very uh, small group atmosphere. Like you can do this on Discord. You can have a more controlled community feeling there,
Yeah,
so it doesn't feel so stressful. It's just like, hey, it's just us in this digital chat room, all friends. So it can be mitigated. But yeah, there might be that expectation. Oh, I have to do performance levels. Like after a while, though, I feel like when you see the actual plays come out, most of the time, no, it's really just people, friends hanging out, and it just can take that. So it's just handling the people. I guess there's just more effort to put in at the start to catch these things. So I don't think it is something that maybe some people would struggle with, especially at the beginning. I do have friends like that, but at the same time, I think with enough relationship building and trust forming within the group, then they're gonna be able to be more comfortable at just playing the game. So
yeah.
all right.
Uh, Thank you for that. With the discovery of TTRPGs, now that we're getting into like the conversation of like the intimacy and the gameplay, I think the next good question is what makes people play the games they play? So getting into their like developing their comfort zones, getting into the perspective or the mindset why people play the games they play. So I'd love to hear from a player perspective why you think people gravitate towards a certain system or a certain gameplay mechanic.
Hmm. Uh, that's a tricky one. I think by nature, comfort zones appear with what you first start with. So, like for me, I started off with um, Exalted, and then touched on D&D just very briefly, and then jumped straight into L5R, the older editions, and I devoured that. So that would probably explain why those would be my favored uh, settings and systems. Uh, so I would say that from an experiential point of view, and also from a shout out to uh, San, he did some surveys when we were preparing for this talk, and it does seem like it's very social. Nga yung drive, like whatever the first guy proposes, people just jump into it, and they tend to develop their comfort zones around it. Like if they're like there's this one friend who's the one who's like introducing the game, like, hey, let's try this thing out. And for most fresh players, they try it out. Most of the time, it's a system like D&D because that's the most market heavily marketed. They have the biggest splash everywhere and visibility. So oftentimes it's that, and they just kind of get into it and they stay there. So it's not I think it's not just the strength of the system as much as the comfort getting into it with your first set of friends, and you like to just play that game, and that's where it starts. That's how I have observed it, and that's also how we've like very quickly surveyed. We got like about, I don't know, 30 to 50 respondents. I have to check the numbers. It's a small population size, but at least it's beyond our own experience. So um, that's what we've seen, or I've seen so far.
Um, Actually, let me bounce off of 2 points from there. Um, John was saying that like people will play what their friends play, and to some extent, I think that is true of other people. Um, I, but the thing is, what's weird is that like I have a very extroverted personality in the MBTI sense, in the sense that like I get energy from being around other people, but I don't necessarily get that feel the need to get that out of tabletop RPGs. In the sense that like I'll see my friend, like I mean, before the pandemic, I regularly host quiz nights, and write and co-organize quiz nights, and I'd regularly like go to friends' gigs, and so I do those in a social capacity. And like of course I like the music, and of course I wouldn't be writing those quizzes if I wasn't into all of the subject matter. But for me, it was also being able to see a regular set of friends, and even if it was some shallow-ish. I mean, it was just hanging out. It was Inuma, and it was like shallow geek talk. That was where I got my social fix. But with RPGs specifically, that's always being able to tell the stories I want to tell. Um, Partly because as a fan, some of the things that I've liked have, you know, naturally been a letdown, especially longer running series. Like I love Lost to bits, but I don't think that it wrapped itself up in the most satisfying way. But with an RPG, I can, and then with an RPG that runs months and months, I can wrap up that along, things up thematically the way I want to, and of course with the input of everyone else at the rest of the table. It is still a shared collective experience. But my satisfaction from it comes from taking part in the world building, taking part in resolving the plot, and that's as exciting to me for a multi-session, multi-arc campaign as it is for a convention one shot. That's always like my number one motivation going into it. And as an extension of that, my favorite systems are the ones that are aligned with the stories that I'm most interested in consuming. Like, I mean, in a really shallow, or in a really like overly confessional the feels kind of way. I'm not completely satisfied with how my teenage years went or whatever, and how my young adulthood went, which is why I do still like a lot of like coming of age type stories, and therefore the
Yeah.
games that tie into that. Monster Hearts, Masks, and so that's why some of those are the games that I keep coming back to.
That's an interesting take. Which I think a lot of people, it's not a conscious thing. So over the past few weeks, I've been thinking like not just applicable to games. I remember taking this quiz online. I forgot what it, Quantic or something, and
Yeah.
it breaks down the motivations of different gamers, and depending on the type of gamer you are, you look for satisfaction in your games in different ways. So some people, they look for their social interaction. They look for social interaction in their game. Other people are just there for like, I just want to enjoy a story and a world build. And other people are there to like, oh, I just want to show that I am mechanically good at this thing. I can hack the system. I can really play the system. So there are different kinds of gamers, and tabletop RPGs lean, um, and lean onto different play styles, and that might be something else also. That's why, which is why some people favor certain systems than others after they've gotten a feel of different game systems. So you did mention that you favor narrative and narrative type systems and systems which are heavy on the world build kind of thing. And I guess it matches because it seems to be that yung ano tawag yan, what you're looking for is pretty much that.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I guess in my case it's a mix. I like crunch, but not too much. So I'm kind of like in the middle ground, which is why I favor. I think this is why I favor the games I play, um, because they are a mix of both crunch and narrative systems. So, so yeah, the White Wolf stuff is very narrative, but there's quite a bit of crunch in it too. And same with the Fantasy Flight stuff. There's granularity to the crunch, but it's also very narrative, much more than some other systems. So it leads to that. That's how I see it.
And the interesting thing with the Fantasy Flight games is, or any games that call for you to narrate advantage or drawbacks, that already is calling you is sort of like inviting players to fill in the details of the scene. And
Yeah,
yeah, that's one of my favorite things about that system, where you're it's asking you to fill in the blanks of a scene to try and match what the dice have given to you. So it's not just
that's true.
this is RNGs. This is RNGs is telling you what type of uh, challenging you to describe what's in front of you.
Mhm. So they're very into like the, oh, okay, so you get this bonus. What does that mean? So it
Yeah.
challenges both the GMs and the players. Like, yeah, so what is your advantage? And you have to come up with like, oh, there's something in the environment, or I have like this thing with me, or and so there is a story element to it. And I also like this part because in the white in the sorry story path, I think that's what I should call it nowadays. The story path universe, the stunting thing, it's like, yeah, stunts. So you get bonus dice and you get bonus stuff if you do stunts, and it comes together na you have to be more narrative about it, you have to be more descriptive and basically challenge your imagination, which I find very appealing because it really brings it back to the story and world element. And it doesn't have to be like, production level imagination. I mean, some of my favorite scenes have been really just uh not stupid, but they've been kind of really comedic, and they're just kind of out of nowhere. So like recently, I had an exalted game with my play group, and out of nowhere, one of my friends just accidentally made cabedoning her signature move. So, because she couldn't think of anything to do with it against the enemy as a stunt, so she's just like, "Okay, I'll cabedon him to the wall because he's cute." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." And our GM was Jay. Jay, if you're out there, you know who this is, and it was really funny. I enjoyed that scene a lot. It was a face palm scene, but it was very visual, and you can like, yeah, I can see that, and it's funny. So super trip ko yan. Yung mga things like that when they just come out of nowhere. And they actually give you like a mechanical advantage because of the fun it generates, which is what I like. You have a benefit for fun stuff, and that's something I appreciate also about Mars. So I got to play with her even in a, I would say, somewhat more rigid system as 5E. She found ways to help me express like the crazy ideas I came up with, like suplexing my enemies off a train, a lightning train in Everon. So it's like, I don't want to deal with them dealing damage one by one. I'll just suplex him off the train. Let the train deal with him. And it's like, okay, how do we figure out what the damage? You know what? Forget it. He dies. He gets run over by the train. He's dead. It's like, I'm not gonna roll for that. He's just dead. That's a lightning chain. So, which is that's a very GM thing to do, which I appreciate. So yeah.
Uh, Speaking of GMs, now that we've kind of got like the player's perspective. You guys dipped a bit on GMs, like having ran some games. I think both of you were able to run some games. From experience, what made you play the systems you ran? Like the things that attracted you to running that particular system. What's the appeal? Like you can give an example of a system that you enjoyed running as a GM, and what attracted you to keep playing it, to keep running it.
PJ, ko muna.
Okay.
Go, go.
Here's an interesting example because I enjoy running Call of Cthulhu. I especially like coming up with my own scenarios that are often in the Philippine context. Um, and what I like about it is that, well, what I like about it personally is that it how do I put this? Like I like that sense of hopelessness and despair, just because it makes you appreciate the hopeful spots even more. But what I've noticed from actual play is that not everyone is necessarily into that, and or that they want a sense, they want to be able to fight back against the great old ones, against things that are beyond our understanding. And I'm like, okay, then and that was sort of what brought me back to Monster of the Week, because it was clear, because from there I shifted from Call of Cthulhu into Delta Green, just because I'm like, sure, okay, it looks like people want to be able to fight back more. That system builds into it, at least it takes it from guaranteed doom into something that's survivable, into like Resident Evil territory, where there's a chance you might actually be able to fight through it. But no, it turns out people don't just want survival horror. They want to be big damn heroes against against monsters, and that's what brought me back to Monster of the Week, because at the very least, that has a built-in. There's always a built-in weakness that, and it's just a matter of learning what the weakness is. And so that's why I'm running a scenario as Monster of the Week that I had originally conceptualized as Call of Cthulhu for the next Dudes and Dice event this Halloween, because just basic off of player behavior. And it's not like it isn't a compromise for me, because I enjoy all of those systems, but it's also become clear from regular playing which styles that people seem to favor more over others.
Well, on my end, what is the reason I play the games I run the games I play? I think would come to the premise. What are the premises of the settings or the games that I play? Uh, L5R for one. I mean, I'm not gonna apologize about the whole weeb nature of the game, the whole samurai fantasy. It's great. The magical samurai fantasy. Even though yes, it is a westernized view of it, but it's a really great setting, and it's really fun to play into it with all of the politics, dynamics, supernatural heroism. Against these odds, and they win. So that's one. And then of course other settings are great. Like I've always liked Star Wars, and then for Scion and Exalted, I've always liked the mythic heroism there. So Scion is more modern urban myth, and then Exalted, of course, is the whole anime scale level heroism and powers that be clashing and you fighting up against it. So unlike the Call of Cthulhu end, where it's like, oh, it's all despair. It's just about how long you're gonna last, and or something before everything collapses. Depending on the certain brand or spin of Cthulhu, I think like the Pulp Cthulhu obviously is a more heroic victory kind of thing. It's actually doable there. Um, but yeah, primarily I just get into it if the setting or the premise of the game appeals to me. So and then the mechanics of the system actually come after, and I get into it, and I just like, oh, is this something I can deal with? Which is also why I went into Battletech and Shadowrun, for a while, but then the mechanics of those systems just got to me. So like I feel like I need a computer to run this thing. So because it's not they're not actually the most difficult games around, but for a GM, for a player, I think it's manageable. It's fine. But for a GM, unless your players are also very responsible players, where they do the calculations for their stuff all on their own, when you have to run those for them, it's like I'm not a computer, I'm not a math savant or anything. So it makes things really slow, right? So that's why eventually I was like, okay, let's just stick with the narratives type systems with a little crunch, so people can fiddle around with things just enough to make it feel like, yes, I got this edge here, that edge there. So yun. So I'm still hoping one of these days that Shadowrun and the similar types of games will have a more narrative version. Hoping for that.
Right. There's an awesome question from Matthew, specifically to John. Has there ever been a time when a setting you were cold to successfully won you over?
Success. Oh, um, so a setting that I'm cold to. What? Okay, I would have to just check like what are all the settings out there, and which of those I would not be very warm towards. I think the ones I'm least inclined to would be certain apocalyptic dystopic settings. But that's kind of still hard for me to just say it's cold. I'm cold with, because I think my personality as a player and as a GM is like I'm pretty much into everything. So it's difficult for me to find a setting I'm cold to, because I feel like almost any setting can be appealing if written and told properly. And any setting which is so great can really go really badly if you just spin your story really poorly. So it's yeah, I think by personality, I prefer a more, for lack of a term, open-minded settings. Like I'm willing to take a look at pretty much anything. I'll give it a read through, and then we'll see. Cause um, yeah. So I guess my answer would be like I'd have to think about it more. What settings I would go to? Because almost every setting I've been good, willing to give it a try, and I'm good with it. Even the horror settings, which I used to not be so keen on.
Why weren't you
Yeah,
keen on the
sorry.
horror
Go ahead.
movies? Just curious.
Oh right, so I'm not really keen on the horror stuff just because I'm just not into horror. Period. Because like I don't getting jolted. I don't like getting jolted. But I figured like it's a game. In a game,
Mm.
there's more, which is funny because this time the setting became the system rather of the tabletop RPG became a more of a comfort for me, because now you have control over stuff happening rather than you just have to take the horror that hits you. So in this case, it's like, oh, my agency now. Oh, I can not be the stupid hero who's always like, That's not, that kind of thing." It's like, no. But so yeah.
Um, which two things bouncing off of your point about um about Shadowrun feeling cumbersome and that you need you need a machine to automate all of this. I do think like the two PBTA cyberpunk settings that I've played um, answer that perfectly. One is the Veil, and with the Veil, you just say what you want to do, but you also say how you want to do it in terms of mood. So like you can do something, you can go with an angry approach, a sad approach, and you actually have modifiers for doing things when you're angry, when you're sad, when you're um and um and so that lends itself to the emotional core of
Yeah.
cyberpunk. And you tell a story built around that, and it also appeals to the weeb side of things because you even have like giddy, but it's giddy different from like both the
Right, right.
traditional sense of giddy and the L5R sense. Here, this is sort of like debts that like units of debt that you're paying of utang ng loob, to put it in Pinoy terms, that you're paying off
Right, right.
to other people.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the social debt thing.
yeah, And then aside from that, there's Balikbayan, which is even closer to Shadowrun because it mixes explicitly both the cyberpunk and the magical side of things, and it does so with Pinoy folklore as a backdrop to that,
Right.
and that takes off even further from PBTA because there's more things that are just about it's less about it's not about rolling it is about applying the traits um and yeah, so I think that both if someone whenever I hear about someone overwhelmed by the crunch of Shadowrun, then that's a direction I'd point them in.
Yeah, that's true. There are a lot of games that are quite friendlier than that. And yeah, but I guess for me, it's just like also adapting the setting. Well, the setting is there, more of like the specificity of the lore.
Yeah.
But those are really interesting stuff, and that is why I have actually been reading up on other things. And sometimes it's just a fun read. It's just really enjoyable to take a look at those stuff. Um, yeah, noted on that. Very noted. Most likely, I will be trying to find copies I can borrow, or if they go on sale online, and I might snag a few if they're on sale.
So now
So,
that we're kind of like on the discussion of like what are we warm towards, what hesitates us with trying or running TTRPGs, I think that's a good talking point, as our next talking point is what actually discourages people from trying other TTRPGs, because they've got them used. There's like reasons why people play their own systems. There's a reason like they got into a system, they discovered this and they stayed in a certain system. So what discourages them? So
Paolo, what do you think?
Okay. I think what I think there's several strands of inertia happening. One strand is where there's a mismatch between between the setting and the rules, and with again, and not to rag on Shadowrun because I enjoy the world that it created, but I do think that that's a good example of where there's a mismatch between the subject matter and the mechanics. And even for someone that does want something that's a little crunchier, there are already alternatives like Cyberpunk Red, which is set in the world of I think it's Cyberpunk, the video game Cyberpunk 2077, is it? And it's still crunchy, but much more rules light, and I think closer to that lighter version of Shadowrun Anarchy, that which is like an accelerated version of Shadowrun that Matthew had mentioned. And so I think that's one, a mismatch between setting and rules. The other is I think a certain subset after the story, especially these are people that might have come to tabletop RPGs by way of board games or by way of other tabletop games. And so they're not necessarily looking about things in terms of story. It's really just fluff and setting, but not necessarily telling a story around it. In which case, I do think the way to ease them into that is to pick games that can be looked at tactically, but still have a strong narrative element to them. Lancer is hands down my favorite for that, just because it has a great internal lore that someone who is into world building can latch onto, but the rules are also they blend the tactical and narrative elements so seamlessly that I think that's kind of a great something for everyone sci-fi game, with other than maybe people that just aren't into mech combat or into mech oriented sci-fi. So that's like the one impediment I think for Lancer, but other than that I think it's very close to a broad all appealing system, and really the only impediment there I suppose would be the price point if you want to own the physical copies. But otherwise, it's incredibly accessible as a digital game, and including the supplements online like CompCon for building the characters and maintaining the mech, which is all free to use. So and then
Yeah,
I guess
Lancer's a good example. Actually, I got to play this with Mars, and I got lucked out. Was able to kickstart it. It's a very good example of a tabletop oriented friendly RPG. And yeah, the mecha thing is like the big thing, but I feel like you can also easily get it to work on a non mecha tactical level. Like it's easy to like get deeper into the crunch, and it's also easy to just fluff it and stay very narrative about the combat. Um, yeah, that's a great example actually. I did. You had something you were gonna go on with?
um well, yeah, I don't. This is just me hypothesizing. I have
Sure.
nothing beyond anecdotal evidence about this, but I do think that privileging the physical copies to some extent make is a barrier to entry because it is costly. There's no way around it. I mean, shipping costs. So if something isn't widely available, then physically, then that is a barrier, or if it's cost prohibitive. But I also think that there's less effort needed now to get digital copies of things, even legally. I mean, like the barrier to entry is lower than it ever has been. At least, all right. With a caveat here, at least for adults with some degree of disposable income. I mean, this is still TRPGs are still a middle class person's hobby, no matter how you cut it, just because of that element, the cultural capital element.
Yeah. Although, yeah, it is actually a lot easier nowadays for everyone because of the legitimacy of, or rather, there is a much more, what is it, easier access to legitimate copies. And, Drive Through RPG and Humble Bundle and all these, they actually give it at very affordable prices on certain deals. And you can get like really good content there. Like it might take some camping to do. Like you might really have to keep your eye out for if they come out with the content that you want. But it's legit, and it can be very cheap. Like I've seen things go for like $5, so that's 250 pesos. So yeah, it is as you said, it is mostly a middle class and up kind of game, but um it has become way more affordable than it used to be. Because I remember when I was in college, I'd have to save up for how long to get this copy of a book, and you know, it's just that comparing the allowance that I had versus what I think are the allowances of kids nowadays, and the relative cost of these materials online coming down to a point. So I feel like it's like what travel used to be before. It used to be prohibitively expensive, but it has become much more affordable. Even now, or perhaps especially now during this pandemic era, because like all the airlines are like, okay, sale, sale, sale. But so yeah, these digital platforms are on sale quite often, and it is actually more accessible. There's still a bit of a bump, a hurdle, definitely, but it is more accessible than it used to be in the 2000s and more or less that era.
Um, I guess like yeah, as Matthew pointed out in the comments, like if there are reluctance for people to buy into a new thing, then you basically have to renegotiate the social contract between not just between GMs and players, but also between the group as a whole. If there's an inconsistent level of buy-in to the game, it's where you start seeing people potentially flake out or try or do things half-heartedly. In which case, I guess the conversation becomes how do you get around those hesitations, those reluctance is how do you sell people on different systems? And I think that's sort of the next point coming up.
The next talking point, now that there's a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of things that may hold people back in getting out of their current setups with their hobbies. So, what are the ways that we can encourage people to try TTRPGs?
Mm. I like the idea that they mentioned of the social contract. I think fundamentally getting people to try something new is highly relational. So you definitely want to have a really good rapport with the people that you're playing with, that you're gaming with, and I think it just calls into question the rapport you have with them, the relational trust that you have with them. Kung meron nga, di ba? And I don't know. It's I guess this is very experiential, so I don't know how it'll impact the others. But like for me and my friends, I have the privilege, and I know it's a privilege, of being highly trusted by my friends. That almost any game that I get into, which can happen quite a lot, because I sometimes joke around that I have a GM schizophrenia because I jump into so many things sometimes. But it's really awesome, and that my group and my friends just like, yeah, okay, we know your sense of gamesmanship, John. We trust you as a GM. We trust you as a storyteller. Um, we know that you have our fun at heart, and you're gonna do your best to make sure we enjoy things. So we're gonna just, what you call, we'll ride with you, and that's a very high degree of trust, and I really appreciate that in my friends. So that said, not everyone's gonna have that kind of setup. So in that case, you do have. I would say you really just have to work on. Ano ba yan? You have to work on your relationship with your players and building up that trust and respect with them, and really just learning to put their enjoyment there. Like they need to know that and feel it, and you like we also have to be sincere about it. If we can manage it or not. So I guess that's just my take, my spin. How others can join us in the game.
Matthew raised the point where, in their experience, having a group where everyone's willing to GM to some capacity is helpful, because organically, it'll sort of rotate through different systems and settings as each person brings their preferences to the table, and hopefully, the end result of that is trying out different games. I could agree with that, especially because I've been in several regular gaming groups with Matthew, and so I can attest to that dynamic happening where, especially where everyone's to a certain degree open-minded about all different genres, but they all have specific preferences in terms of what experiences and subgenres they'd like to dabble in. But that keeps things dynamic because you end up cycling through different games and different systems. The other
Yeah, go on.
the other thing is that, also, as seeing things from both sides, the GM and the player, sometimes I also find that it also helps if you go to some of the Discord communities that are specific to the type of games that you like getting on the Night at the Opera Discord server for Delta Green was like it completely expanded my perspective in terms of the way the game can be played. At the same time, the downside also is you sort of see how many potential bad actors are also playing bad actors in the social sense, but or people that aren't terribly sensitive about crossing boundaries. But I suppose for better or worse, elements of Delta Green will always attract people with that lack of boundaries, partly because that's sort of built into one element of the game thematically, and it's just something you sort of have to deal with when you're when you choose to take it on as a system. Um, oh yeah, and yeah, Matthew pointed out that yeah, having that kind of group where everyone is generally open-minded and also willing to take the initiative to take on the GM role in a rotating way is sort of a privilege. I mean, it's not everyone. Uh, this is sort of social RNG at work to find that level of chemistry with the right people and with a schedule that can accommodate everyone, and hopefully living in the same city, but if not, able to do it in a way that
Mhm.
that they can make it all work in terms of scheduling.
That
I
is
guess
true.
just to add on to this question, has has the online scene, at least like the online setup of like setting up one shots or open tables, has that been a way to help people at least check out certain systems? Has that been helpful? Do you guys have any first-hand experience of like opening a table, finding out that someone was generally hesitant, but after trying your table, they became a regular, or any experiences with one shots or open tables, encouraging people to try new things?
Mm. During the digital era, okay, so in theory, I think it is easier to do one shots, and I think yeah, actually over the past 2 years, we have done more one. I have experienced more one shots with friends and other people I haven't met until that time. I think people are um, more willing to play nowadays within Discord setup. You know, so it feels like there's a community. Like okay, the people here have been in a sense screened, or at least they're tracked, so it's not so RNG. And but I just wanted to also point out the having the people in the same city thing, because of Discord, because of the Twitch, because of all of these internet based gaming platforms. It's now a lot more easier to set up a game. Like logistically speaking, there's a lot less of a hindrance. And as PJ mentioned earlier, tabletop RPGs are inherently a middle class and upper class kind of game, which means to say most of the people who play these games can probably afford a decent or functional computer setup, most likely, or at least their household is able to. And so, yeah, play from home has become a new thing, you know, and it has become a more common thing. So people are a lot more can be more relaxed because they're home. Well, hopefully, they have the kind of environment which allows them to play easily at home. But yes, there's more. I'd like to point out, like what Matt said here. There are still a lot of scheduling challenges, but I feel like the scheduling challenge comes because we're suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I can commit to a game so easily, and then suddenly it's like, yeah, let's throw in a game, and then suddenly you realize like I'm playing too many games or something like that, and then you suddenly just overbook yourself. I think that's a funny thing that happens, but it is a I would like to say it was a good problem in terms of suddenly like being able to connect and play online digitally. Um, just tacking on the playing with the playgroup kind of environment.
Just to like further follow up question for this one, how do you like how do you find your play group, or like what are the ways that could help people, like you said, to develop a trust or develop a relationship with that play group? What is usually your system for finding your play group, finding your community to play with?
Mm, PJ, you want to go first?
Sure. Actually, this is the one thing that's changed for me most since the pandemic began, because I feel like I had a much more steady and regular play group before the pandemic, when we could meet face to face, and also when I had the opportunity to meet people face to face during cons. Um, but and so I think that there was a lot more regularity, a lot more consistency, a lot more and by extension of that, a lot more room to develop trust and to nurture um, relationships between players. And I think that's something that's sort of degraded for me as both a player and a GM. I feel like I'm running much more for like one-shot groups. They'll play with one time, have a good decent chemistry with, but there isn't a whole lot of follow-up just because I'm on to the next system, I'm on to the next game, and sometimes and usually that's on to the next group in the next Discord server, and so like all of my memorable experiences from the last year and a half or so have been like con type setups where there's been an organized table, um, and the closest thing to I've been in a campaign in the last year and a half was well, no, actually, I have been in a few campaigns, but just because I guess it's like I see these people only during the games and not necessarily between them. It has like the full extent of the camaraderie has been at the gaming table and not between sessions, not hanging out, not like I don't feel like I get to know a lot of the regular group, my regular groups now as people. I know them only as players, and I think that's the biggest difference to me between the pre-pandemic and doing everything online. And I don't know if I'd blame that on online, but it certainly feels like it's an added layer of distance.
So for me, I actually have kind of the opposite experience. So it's kind of interesting, but for me, I actually got into more campaign games during the pandemic. But I think that's unique to me because like a lot of my friends and RPG gamer friends, prior to Mars, of course, and the community here, we're mostly Manila based, and I travel from city to city. So when the pandemic hit and the digital thing came around, I actually found more regular time with my players who happen to be mostly my, you could call it my barkada. So my play group at large and our community in general at large is where I mostly for lack of a better term market my games. And because of that, and because we're all online nearly much most of the day in some way or another, you can just drop a message on Discord or on the face on Messenger on chat groups. We actually were able to spend more consistent time gaming. And what you mentioned was that you didn't get to spend time with your players outside of players. But at least in our case, the way we utilized our community was it wasn't just during the campaign games, but we hung out in other ways. Like we hung out in we would have super random Inuma nights. We would have like these like, oh, let's play other games, and then there are times you just hang out in the Discord, and after the games are done, or even before the games, we just chat life. And I think that's it's a again, it is a privilege to have that kind of setup. It's a rare, it's well, maybe not rare, but it's not a very common thing, I think, to have that kind of setup. So I guess it was a blessing for that, really. Like it felt like a digital it's a, or me and the other guys who run the Discord, we like to peg ourselves as some sort of like a digital coffee house or cafe. Like, hey, you can geek out here, you can play here. If you just want to like, oh, call these guys like, hey, you're playing this game, tara, let's just chat about it, let's share our memes about it. And it's anything under the sun. So that's kind of what happened in our Discord, and that's how we were running the community. So I think it depends on the particular atmosphere of the community that you have. Is it a bunch of extended regulars at this gaming cafe or geek cafe, diba? I think that's a thing that used to be the case, right? Like before the pandemic, or even during in previous years, maybe you'd have like a cafe or a gaming area which you'd normally go to. You'd see your regulars there. You get to game with them there, and this is like a virtual version of that. And that does take time to create, and then that does take direction to like cultivate that kind of atmosphere. But I do think it can be done, and I've seen this in even in like Mars and the dude server. Like there is a significant population there, community there, and they do a lot of games, and they also as I like to say, they also do life with each other. So I think it is possible, but you need to there it is true that you might need to find that community, and you might need to learn how to get used to a digital kind of community. So yeah, it definitely takes a bit of effort to takes a bit of relationship building, but it is possible. That said, I will also definitely say that the face to face friends hanging out I of course miss that, and look forward to that coming around. Yeah. I mean, it's just different too.
Thank you for
Yeah.
those insights. So, as we conclude the quick talks, I want to give both of you the floor on the takeaways, the few thoughts that we've discussed in this particular episode. Everything we talked about comfort zones, trying new experiences. What are the things you'd like to leave to the listeners that have listened? Thank you to the people that have listened and have commented on both the YouTube and Facebook page. What are the final thoughts? The things you'd like them to take from this discussion?
Mm. PJ, you want to go for this?
Um, I think that well, working backwards from the most recent point raised, I think that if you want to get people to start playing a broader set of games, it might help to just trust comes first. Then establish that trust. Let them trust you as a player, and then move on, ideally, to trusting you as a friend. And from there, that can be the basis for saying, "Hey, if you trust me as a person and as a GM, then let's express. This is what I'm into. Um, we can try this." And then I think related to that as well, it helps to come up with a framework around what type of game do you want to play. Like you brought up getting silly in settings that may ostensibly on the surface seem really dark and or serious or grim, and so it's about also doing a temp check in the session zero and managing expectations around how serious do we want to take the world, how seriously do you want to inhabit the themes of this game, and or once you do that, and maybe even do that without even a specific game in mind, so that once you have an idea of what everyone's after collectively, then you can decide on a game around that, and hopefully that it won't feel any less um enthusiastic just because it's been sort of Frankenstein together from the overlap of what everyone at the table wants.
Yeah, working off that, definitely. So we've established that tabletop RPGs are, again, one of the more social games. So I guess if there's any takeaway that I'd like to leave people with is that uh, something to value, especially now. It's like when we have fun, especially in games like tabletop RPGs, it is a mutual fun. It's not exclusive. It's not just about us. We want the table to have fun. So we have to learn to connect and appreciate each other well. We have to learn to build that um, degree of friendship and trust and understanding of other people so that we can come up with a mutually enjoyable experience. So we do have to come out of our own heads sometimes. Not sometimes. We do have to come out of our own uh, box, and that's actually a mature thing to do anyway, right? Di ba? I mean, developing better understanding, communication with other people. So these are actually extensions and developments of what you would learn and develop in a social RPG anyway, in a tabletop RPG. We're just extending it a bit further to make sure that everyone gets to have fun at your table. So once you have that, then hey, then at that point you can invite people to join you, and you as well can, maybe you can just be more willing to also take the leap with other friends of yours into exploring other worlds, exploring other ways to have fun. Because at the end of the day, tabletop RPGs are really just boiled down to that. It's a game. It's meant for people to enjoy their time together with each other. And so hopefully you guys will treat it that way. Like, these are different books. So different movies, different settings, and hey, it's don't go alone. You know, take your friends with you, or go with your friends. Um, and I think you won't be disappointed. It might take a bit adjustment to try things out, but I believe it's worth the effort.
Thank you so much, John and Paulo. As we conclude, I just want to give just a bit of a time for shout outs and a bit of plug-ins before we end the stream. Uh, Real quick, we have an event, the Two Nights of Horror Year 2. We are in our second year. We have officially 10 tables in this
Right.
event, and one of our games is what Paolo mentioned, which is his Monster of the Week, translated from his Call of Cthulhu scenario, based off the local scene. You guys can sign up for his game. You can just type on Facebook Two Nights of Horror Year 2, and you can sign up on his post, Manzanilla, for his event, and as well as a few more games. There's still a lot more games that are available. More like the Fate Core system, and even actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf. I didn't even realize that was a thing. And then Everyone is a Zombie. There's also more Call of Cthulhu, and just 10 tables ready to uh, try out other systems. These are new systems beyond just the usual D20 D&D systems. You guys can definitely check that out. Two Nights of Horror Year 2. Also, feel free to check out Level Up Game Nights. They do a lot of discussions about nerd culture. They also stream. I think they just concluded their Exalted game. Is that correct? Um,
We have a two-part finale. So GMJs are is running this for us, and yeah, we're gonna conclude our finale in about 2 weeks from now, I believe.
All right, 2 weeks from now, you guys can catch up on some of the episodes. They stream it on their page. Feel free to give them a like. And yeah, so
Yes,
feel
sir.
free to try out those systems and check out the events, check out the pages. And again, thank you so much for John and Paolo for your time, for the discussions. Really appreciate you guys joining in on the second episode. Again, our last but not least, our third installment for this series is going to be the horror in running games, which is going to be talked about by GMJ and GM Lance, which is going to be next Monday. But yeah, thank you guys for this talk. Thank you for the listeners, the lovely listeners, um, for checking out The Fear of the Unknown. And we'll see you guys next Monday. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.